Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Uncommon Sense, number 41. Craig and I are sprinting towards the half century. So it's great to have you here again, Craig, and introducing our special guest for today, Paul Milbourne from Melbourne, in terms of a financial advisor and risk advisor. So welcome, Paul. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks, Craig. Thanks for having me and inviting me along.
You're welcome.
Pleasure, mate. Yeah, thank you, mate. Thank you, Dean. You are right. We are heading towards the half century. I hadn't thought about that until you mentioned it. But
don't get nervous.
I
hate to go.
Just completely thrown me now. I don't know what to do. No, but look, thanks for joining us today, Paul. It's great to have you here, mate. In doing a bit of research, I was reading about what gets you excited on your site, and I'm going to read this so I get it right because I really like it. It's helping professionals make an impact on their family, business, staff, communities, and clients. I get a real buzz out of helping intelligent, successful, and driven people have the aha moment. So, mate, where I would love to start is what's one of your favorite aha moments that your clients have had?
Yep. Look, in terms of business clients, if I go some of those industry legends, they talk about the questions you ask and everything else. Most of that hasn't changed. Imagine we're all in business together, right? And we all like each other and work really, really well. But Craig, the reality is, I see my wife's in the background there. You probably don't want my wife at your boardroom table. And there were three gentlemen who have a lift hire business for commercial building. And we're in the factory out in the western suburbs of Melbourne. They're still smoking in the office. The language you can't talk about in a genuine blue collar environment, and they've got about a $15-20 million business. They've ridden the building boom in Melbourne, and I just simply asked the question. One of you guys has just had a serious health event. One of you guys is 55 years old and actually told me earlier that when you guys started 15 years ago, you wanted to retire at 50, and one of you is married for the third time. So tell me, guys, if any one of you were to pass away yesterday, how do we all feel about their wife sitting at the boardroom table? And while not to be derogatory towards spouses, you can imagine the language that started firing around the little office table in the smoke-filled room in the western suburbs of Melbourne. And it was, that really interesting of, geez, we get along really, really well and we support our families amazingly in this business, but none of us want to be in business with anyone else. And that includes, each of your spouses.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's the funny part, but the reality, Paul, is that it just doesn't get considered and discussed around boardroom tables, whether it's a plastic table in a factory or a bigger boardroom table in the city. We discover this same situation, that this conversation is not coming up at all. So firstly, Paul, tell us a little bit about your experience and your journey as an advisor, which led you down this specialization. And then we're going to unpack, all the reasons, the good and bad, as to why financial advisors themselves are not going down this path for their own businesses, and what the challenges are about with the conversations they're having with clients.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. I think like a lot of risk insurance or riskies my age, we're accidental in where we've got to for various reasons. So, I mean, I was, as a young man, went overseas and was an international financial advisor, which is probably a different discussion, to be honest, and sounds far sexier than it really was. And when I left Australia, I'd done the SMSF courses, the aged care courses. I was a super technical associate advisor. And through the nature of being overseas, I continued to do insurance. And, 8 or so years later, trying to come back to Australia, what I'd learned is, I was not a technical advisor anymore at all. I couldn't spell self-managed super in reality. But what I was really, really good at was, one, finding a client, two, helping them articulate their goals, needs, objectives, what it is that keeps them awake at night, what they want in the future. And then three, helping them understand the solutions to meet all of those. And at that whole time, I had still been doing insurance as well and had a very, very, very small Australian financial planning business that had about 50 risk-only clients and I think one retail super fund. So I was returning back to Australia, and ultimately there was a few jobs in the marketplace, but there was a really good job going at Centric Wealth at the time, which was a risk-only job, and it was to be mentored and then take over the book of one of, I guess, the industry pioneers of the business succession and risk insurance space. And I looked back, and a mentor had told me, you are a risky. I thought, well, actually, you're probably right, and I can't really spell SMSF or aged care. And yes, about 8 years ago, I realised that I was a risk-only specialist at the end of the day.
Yep. And so you lent into that specialisation, obviously.
Yeah.
And so the experience that you've built up over the years, you've spoken to a lot of business owners, and probably we'll kind of focus on the theme of professional services because that's the clientele that that Craig and I are talking to as well. How do you start the conversation with a professional services firm around their succession? Do you talk to them? Do lawyers talk to them? Who's the first person, and how does everyone else get involved?
Yeah, so I think in the process of business succession, estate advice in this particular realm, I'm talking not the overall estate planning realm, but my position is to take the lead advisor role in this and to really be the chief cat herder.
Yep.
Without speaking ill of accountants or lawyers, I generally find that they're really good at what they do, but they're busy billing in 6-minute lots, and as opposed to how I guess we get remunerated usually in insurance land, allows us to take that longer approach to it. So my view is that I'm the lead advisor. I'm the facilitator of the discussion, shall we say. But equally, I work intimately with the accountant and the lawyer because I'm not an accountant and I'm not a lawyer. And despite what we might get in some of those TEL masterclasses and the like, I don't think it's my job to give the actual ownership advice. Yeah, that's a lawyer. I don't think it's my job to give taxation consequences or structure. That's the accountant. And I guess equally to that, if you're dealing with good businesses, they've usually got accountants and lawyers, and neither of those two professionals like being blindsided by a financial advisor. So you've got to pick them up and take them on the journey with you as well. And what I've usually found, Dean, is there's a bit of some aha moments. Particularly with the accountants who are a lot more relationship driven than lawyers at the end of the day. And they start to pick through it as well because, they know what we're doing, but they've never had that journey. Sort of, we're going off topic a little bit, but, usually if you talk to an older accountant in regional Australia, their comment is, I haven't seen this since the A&P man left.
Yeah. Yep.
But guys, the A&P man hasn't been around now for about 25 years, right? So if you're an accountant under 50 years old, you learnt this.
I've never met an A&P man. Yeah.
Right.
So let's talk about that, like the A&P man and then the void thereafter. So there's not no one because you're doing it, but how many of the 15,000 advisors do you think are doing what you're doing? And why aren't others following in your footsteps, or why aren't our advisors just doing it as part of their normal operations?
Yep. So what do the latest surveys say? There's 150 risk-only advisors out of the 15 or so thousand, give or take. I saw NMG break that 15,000 down a little while back to about 11,000 apparently.
Yep.
So I guess one is a specialisation within, business succession and business debt and key person advice. It's a specialist subset of the risk insurance space anyway. So it's the niche within the niche, so to speak. So if we go up a little bit further, I think most financial planners, because there is that much business out there, it's not funny. So we've all gone through the Royal Commission. Our grandfather commissions are gone. We've trimmed up our businesses. We now have 90 to 100 or whatever it might well be, ideal clients. We're trying to all run a book of $750 to $1 million, give or take, and get our FDSs and opt-ins done. And in that younger age bracket, they've all come through predominantly, I'm generalising here, to take over the older boys' book or the older ladies' book. So they're pretty skilled at relationship management, but haven't necessarily had to bring on that much new business. And there's a bit of a chasm or a void now where, a lot of financial planning firms, their books are older and going one way. So there needs to be a new skill set coming into the advice realm around the wealth accumulator and giving that holistic advice to the wealth accumulator. So I've kind of gone around a little bit here, Dean, but then into the business succession space. I remember when I had my interview at Findex, 8 or so years ago, and I hadn't done. I did one when I was the associate, being handheld by a BDM and the advisor in reality, but hadn't seen it since until 8 years ago, and it's kind of painted in all this mystique and as if this it's super hard and everything else. The reality is it's just life insurance or just TPD or just trauma insurance, and it's just solving a different problem. And once you can get over that mental hurdle of all I'm simply doing here is repurposing a life insurance contract to solve this particular problem over here, I think that's a big hurdle. But we certainly painted in a lot of mystique. But it is a different skill set. It's a different skill set from a soft skills. It's a different skill set from how you interview or interrogate or ask questions. And then it's a different skill to underwrite as well. Yeah. But what I wouldn't say is it's not hard. It's just learning a new skill.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think, Paul, it's such a strong message because one of the things you see with this is the access to capital and the ability to get it. And not only the ability to plan to get it, but quite often the ability where you don't have time to plan to even get it to be able to move on and fulfill that succession. And so I think that's why the conversation you're having with business owners is incredibly important. How many are you dealing with in terms of sole traders? So one advisor, I'm talking about advisors now, like a one advisor business that's them, they've got a team, but if that advisor doesn't exist, there is no one to advise their clients.
Exactly.
We're starting to see opportunities where another individual advisor is going, well, hey, maybe we could help each other. And I know, Dean, between you and I, we've connected a number of these now in terms of helping each other. Do you deal with people like that and sit in between and help create policies to support each other through perhaps an unplanned succession if that was to happen?
Definitely, Craig, definitely. I think the advice business is interesting. The good news is I see it in lawyers and accountants as well. So as a profession, we are no different to our other professional services cohort. I don't do that much with mortgage brokers, but if lawyers and accountants and planners are the same, I'm sure they're no different. We're not very good at putting the oxygen mask on ourselves. We don't think about necessarily that succession piece in our business. While it's not financial advisor focused, if you saw my LinkedIn post this morning, it was about a GP who was a sole practice GP. He had the nurse and 2 staff, and we asked the question, if you weren't coming in today, what would happen? And he's got 2 months worth of expenses sitting in cash, and that's it. So in turn, and our financial planning businesses, our revenue models is a bit different. There is that reoccurring revenue piece, but how long will that last for, especially with FDS and opt-in now? I would argue that, you've probably got 6 months before your business is all over, give or take.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We've heard cases where licensees are contemplating or actually having to turn off fees if the advisor were no longer here or able to work in the business because there's no one to provide the concept of ongoing service, which the client has opted into as a result. So what are a couple of what are these big blockers, Paul, that the business owners have, professional business owners? Why aren't they contemplating this? And then obviously they just don't know who to call if they are. So what's the first thing? Why aren't they contemplating this as part of their strategy?
Yep. Apologies for going on tangents again, guys. I've got a bit of theory around some of this.
You can go as many tangents as you want.
So obviously we've got, I call it the old boys, they're all retired now at the end of the day. So you've got that piece. Equally, the banks aren't in the business anymore. When the banks were distributing at the end of the day, that's what they were doing, distributing. They were actively going into the business banks. They'd set this all up and they were actively promoting this. I've sat in front of credit fund managers who were lending, usually $3 to $5 million to SMEs going, oh, we knew about that, but we haven't heard about it in 10 years. So we didn't think it existed anymore. So I think there's a genuine lack of market at the SME level. There's a genuine lack of market awareness. Yep. There's a whole new generation of bankers that don't worry about it because they might see it as a problem, but they don't believe there's a solution to solve that problem anymore. Right. So it's not it's not thought about as something that can be solved. And then we have the advisory piece. Again, not trying to denigrate any of our professionals, but most lawyers write shareholders agreements, put a note in there about the death and TPD, and at best say you better go find someone, but often that's an at best comment. Accountants know about it, but don't want to be seen as selling or having that difficult conversation with their clients. And back to us as the advisors, as SMEs, right? We're not putting the oxygen mask on ourselves.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this beforehand, right? That you're either an Apple user or an iPhone or an Android user, and whichever one you use, you advocate like hell for that product. I would guarantee you, if we were 3 solo advice practitioners and we had our succession in order, whatever that might look like, I would guarantee you would be advocating to our clients for the exact same thing. And again, we know this across the cohort of the advisory SMEs. Very few as a percentage would have their succession in place.
Yeah. And is it the first conversation that's most complicated as to what do we actually want to do? Or is it the funding mechanism, which ends up being most likely insurance? Is that the hard bit?
That should be the last thing you talk about.
Yeah.
That's so far down the end, it's not funny. I think it's really, there's the old thing, if she'll be right, but it's asking really good questions. And any of us can ask those good questions, but, it goes back to the fundamental thing there. And again, yesterday's meeting, Mr. Doctor, if you were not working for, 2 or 3 months, what's the financial ramifications on your business? And to quote him, we'd be stuffed.
Yep.
All right. What's the ramifications on your family then? Well, Paul, we've got a little bit of savings. Obviously, my business owns these premises. We're going to foreclose on those. I won't be able to put my kids in school or pay my mortgage or feed my family. So it cascades really quickly from there. But it started with just asking the business owner to visualize or think about, if there was no money coming in for whatever reason, what would the ramifications be? And what's really important, Dean and Craig, is getting them to articulate that, what is the consequence of this happening? And you're not selling insurance. I guess this is a maturity thing in the professional journey of staying away from solution mode as much as possible, and especially in that first meeting. They might go to solution mode, but they just need to become aware that they've got some potential risks here, and those risks have to be tied back to someone or something they love.
Yeah.
Because if I was a single guy running my business, without a family, I probably don't really the someone I love doesn't exist, right? So the something I love is either going to be my staff or my clients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have to have a look, and for most SMEs, given they have a family, there's that genuine link between their family, business, staff, and clients as well.
But definitely the staff element is really important, whether you have 2 staff or 200 staff. The idea that the business is operating as a going concern the day before you died. And so you got 200 lives that are, getting a paycheck from your business, and something happens to you the next day. The ability for you to pay the bank, pay the wages, and to maintain your contracts that you had beforehand is all taken away.
Yep. And it's crazy, isn't it? Like, if I'm on wages working for you two gentlemen, I can get a home loan, no problems. But as business owners, you got to go through 50 more hoops and maybe not get one. And yet the actual risk for me and my wages is you two are the business owners.
If you work for a small business, they're never going to ask, do you, how's your advisors how is your business buy sell operated through that process? So what are some of the war stories, Paul, in terms of 2 categories, I suppose? The first is the category of people that didn't take action. What's the worst thing that you've kind of seen in terms of businesses folding over as a result of not having this documented? And then we'll kind of pick up the poorly documented or poorly underwritten kind of stuff as sort of step 2.
Yep. Probably the saddest one I've seen is 2 accountants in partnership with each other. And, they've been friends for a long time, right? They're, as I'm talking family friends as well. One, unfortunately, has a heart attack and passes away, and kind of stops answering their phone to their deceased business partner's spouse fairly quickly, vacates the premises and hangs a shingle up a few doors up the road, as you know. But, we're talking about a smaller community here, right? So no one knows much otherwise. So the clients walk in 3 doors up rather than that door there, and business as usual for them. And eventually the spouse sort of comes along saying, well, I'm just wondering where, my half of the business is. And the answer is, well, what half of the business? That closed down. It stopped trading. It has no revenue. It has no clients. And we all know this, right? Money does weird things to people. And unfortunately, someone wasn't here to solve that problem when it had gone sour.
And the executor, which in that scenario most likely was the spouse, may not have even had the sophistication to immediately understand that they needed to step in and point themselves as a director, do something to control the really big asset that the family had.
Correct. It was a loving, trusting, long-term relationship.
It's amazing, Paul, isn't it? I see this happen all the time, and you're so spot on when it comes to money, how important it is to have it agreed up front, to work with someone like you to agree on that up front, and then make sure everyone knows about that. So do you, because you mentioned the spouses before, like no one wants their business partner's spouse potentially then being in the business. But at what stage in your process do you actually make sure everyone's informed? So everyone actually knows, so there are no arguments should that moment happen.
That's really tough, Craig, because you're trying to get everyone to this table. I'll call it documenting the shareholders' agreement. All right, that's what I have to make sure happens.
Yep.
Then you've got their individual wills sitting behind that. And, a good estate planning lawyer can smell blood, right? And go, all right, I can do this document and I can pick up 3 or 4 wills on the back of it. What a great package. But, usually the more people involved, 1 or 2 might do it, the other 2 might not. I was with my preferred lawyer this morning and we were going through the scenarios. On his desk was the shareholders agreement, one of the business partners, estate planning affairs, but the other business partner still hasn't got to it. And that's something I'm going to get to, but they still haven't got to it. So my view is, Craig, 1, let's get everyone to the table. That can sometimes be a step too far, I think, unless you're kind of moving into that family board or business board of advisory scenario, which is, becoming a much bigger concept in Australia, but is still, infant at best. The one thing I do then want to do is, send emails, and at least have a good trail there to say, this is what we discussed. Craig, I did try and, we did attempt to get your spouse there. I think, though, for me personally as a professional, that's where I want to get to as well, which I think is that next evolution in terms of, family board of advisory style work.
And how many clients do you have in one situation? Like, that's the complexity. I think lawyers are quite good in terms of knowing who their client is. If you've got a business with, say, 3 partners in it, you kind of have 4 clients at once, being the 3 humans and the business itself. How do you sort of think about those? Are they conflicts, and how do you kind of communicate those?
Yeah. So it's interesting, hard, and there's no good answer.
Yeah.
There's probably a best practice path moving forward. So I always view it as the business as a client, shall we say. And then when we're giving the advice to the business, relevant parties are all in that sphere. As a general rule of thumb, if we fix the business, the money should start flowing to the families anyhow.
Yes. Yep.
So then we have to come over here and address them and their needs separately. Again, usual rules of probability is if we've got 3 shareholders, you've got 1 that's being dragged along, 1 that's in the tent and usually driving the conversation, and on the bell curve of change, the middle one is in the tent as well, but happy that the other person's driving it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
And is that linked to the percentage ownership, or it's just linked to the fear? Like, you could be the minority shareholder and be scared that the old guy's going to die and you can't afford to buy them out, or is it the old guy going, I need to solve this because they can't afford to buy me out?
It often depends on how you've come into the transaction and the advice
Okay.
piece. My favorite is always when they've already got a shareholders agreement in place, because you ask to read the shareholders agreement. You sit there with the highlighter and start highlighting, and the questions are there. I had one last year where the business is worth $4 million, and the minority shareholder owns 20%, and it says that she will have to pay 80% within 30 days of the major shareholder dying. And she was arguing over the valuation of the business with him. That's for you to argue with the accountant, right? Unfortunately, you have signed a document that says you're going to give $3.2 million to those people over there within 30 days of her death. So we can argue all this we want, but do you want to be in the court with the court saying sell your house, which isn't worth $3.2 million, because that's the document you've signed right now that you're legally held to. So a lot of that, I think, comes down to what's in the documentation. And that's a big... And I don't care whether we're talking to financial planners here, by the way, or accountants. That's a big opportunity for us, because most of our ideal clients are SMEs or higher income earners, but we know so much about these SMEs, and to be able to sit there and help them articulate what should be in their shareholders agreement and their successions and their documentation, and charging fees for it as well. We're in the driver's seat to take that to the lawyer rather than the other way around.
And there's definitely been a movement in the last sort of 5 to 10 years about advisors doing that first step of introducing the concept of estate planning and having those conversations. So that I always said it, that I'm having this conversation with you now, Mr. Client, so that when you get in front of the lawyer, you're hearing it for the second time from the lawyer's perspective, and then you know how to make decisions quicker than you otherwise would have. And so we've got an opportunity to evolve that in terms of business succession as well at the same time.
Definitely.
Mate,
go, Craig.
I was going to say, maybe
I gave you a pause. You just didn't step in quick enough.
Didn't step into it. It was just a bit. So, but I was just thinking, maybe to finish off, is there the top 2 or 3 things that you would tell someone who's sitting there thinking about this? What do they do next? What should they do? How should they go about it?
Yeah. You mean as an advisor, Craig, that's thinking about moving into this step?
Or clients sitting there going, I know I should be doing this and we're not. And
I'll deal with the advisors piece first, because I'm pretty passionate about this. I actually wrote something again on LinkedIn a little while back, but that's probably a different piece. But, the 15 or so financial planners, we have an obligation to our clients in reality to help them understand what their risks are in terms of meeting their goals, needs, objectives, and future plans. And I think, we need to step up a bit more as a profession and really start addressing those. I feel pretty uneasy when I read an SOA that leaves 20 grand in an industry fund to deal with the insurance later. Now, whether we upskill ourselves in this area, because I also think it's pretty hard if you're doing only 3 or 4 a year. I get that. But it is a massive opportunity for revenue growth and serving clients in your business. If it's not your jam, there's some really good specialist firms out there that play in all different kinds of niches. To whether it's the mum and dad, I'll call it first home loaner space, to the wealth accumulators, to the business successions. Power up, because the last thing you want is that horrible phone call saying, "Oh my God, you won't believe what's just happened," and then you sitting there going, "Well, geez, I didn't address that." And really, could you sleep at night going, "I put it in SOA"? I couldn't. So on that piece, I think it's really about us as a profession starting to realise that giving insurance advice isn't hard, first of all. There are challenges and there are obstacles, but I'd rather be dealing with an insurance company than Centrelink. And we seem to have no issue in doing that as a profession. And the next thing in terms of the clients, I think it's really about having the conversation. Given business succession is a specialist area, I genuinely believe we have to upskill in terms of, and not our technical knowledge necessarily, but our soft skills and our communication. And there are some great resources out there. There's a gentleman, Russell Collins, who wrote a book, and I call it my Bible. It's in my bag. I carry it everywhere. I use it to prepare for almost every meeting, because to keep it simple, why am I going to reinvent his wheel for? He's written 100 and something pages. I've just got to go in there and reference it, and away I go. So there's some really good material out there to help the advisor prepare for the meeting, to understand what questions they should be asking. And equally, we're all trying to work with COIs as well. So we should be sitting there, and accountants are a really good example. If you're trying to procure a relationship with an accountant as a COI, most of them will say, I don't have these clients. And the simple question of, well, are you an ITR client or a business services accountant, or a business services accountant? And there are ITR accountants out there, don't get me wrong, and they might be your market, and that's cool. But in terms of business succession, you want to be dealing with the accountants that deal in the business owners marketplace. And every time I've asked that question of an accountant, like, I don't know, I'm definitely in the business owners marketplace. Yeah. Fantastic. Then you and I both have mutual interest. Yeah. And so it's talking to them and trying to help, whether it's the business owner, the banker, the broker, the lawyer. If, you just sit there, that little piece of education of, again, I've stolen this off Russell, just to be clear. The business owner signs twice for their debt usually. The first time they sign is the business owner, and they're happy now, they've got their widget. The second time they sign as a guarantor and put the family's home on the line. And what does that do? It moves their family from a place of certainty to uncertainty. And quite simply, addressing the life insurance needs of that in the business moves their family back into the first heir of the estate. And my experience has been keeping it as simple as that. Everyone understands that, right?
Yep.
Especially when you're talking to an accountant or a business owner, they understand. Again, one of my clients yesterday, what's your debt? I own my house. Fantastic. Business debt, $1 million. Who secured the $1 million? The house.
Yeah.
Right. So we've still got a problem.
Yeah, and it's all these unintended consequences that the business owner doesn't always put all the pieces together when the cards start all falling on one another at the end of the day. And so even if you've got an ATO payment plan, as simple as that is in the current economic environment, that then is obviously a debt to the company if something were to happen to you. And then the ATO is pursuing you as a personally because of your director obligations to pay superannuation, PAYG, and the house might be in trouble there as well. So what's the war story, Paul, in terms of what you've seen in terms of succession being put in place? I've got this idea in my head that someone died, they got all the insurance, and they kept the business. What's the worst thing that you've seen to finish us up?
I haven't seen that, but I know it's happened.
Yeah.
Poor documentation. That deems an outcome of poor documentation and ownership structures. But I think there's two opportunities and one thing I've seen, if that makes sense. So, for a long time there, cross ownership and self-managed super were seen and sold by certain lawyers as the solution for this. That's a huge opportunity for us, right? Because if we're seeing it with cross ownership or SMSF, we know we can add value straight away. So it's going to cause problems, especially the SMSF piece, but it's something we can quickly undo.
The
next one is, again, if they've already got it in place, the reality is most want to claim a tax deduction, and most accountants are happy to claim a tax deduction. And again, I'm keeping something complicated simple here, but, if you've got, let's say, $1 million policy and it pays out and be claiming a tax deduction, it's probably revenue. And probably assessable. So again, a great opportunity to review and repurpose and get the right advice and the right structures. The one that I see the most, though, is really simple businesses, 2 personal trainers going into business together, 2 physios, 2 osteos, even 2 financial planners or accountants. And they go, all right, we're going to get some cover in place. They go and get the documentation. So they've done everything right, except they're then just going to take the cover out in their retail super fund. And look, it's all well and good. We've got an extra $1 million here, gentlemen, of life cover for this particular purpose. But in my case, it's actually been paid to my estate. It's gone to my testamentary trust, and it's looking after my wife now.
Yes.
So we've still got a problem here where my wife wants her pound of flesh for the business that we've got an agreement on.
And that's the example that I was talking about, that poor documentation hasn't stitched the insurance policy to the event being the conveyancing document or that shareholders agreement. Probably retail insurance is the worst for that. You've got to have the business has to probably own or control the policy so that it's got certainty for the two shareholders.
Correct. And that's where the whole review process comes in as well. And it's, we could talk another 4 hours about this, but that's where building your business comes in. You need to be reviewing this depending on the business every 6 to 12 months.
Yep.
And if you're out doing that, business just does business.
Excellent. Well, that's a good spot to finish, I reckon, Paul, in terms of business does business, that we all are in the business of growing our businesses overall. And so this is a great thing. Obviously, everyone can follow you on LinkedIn, Paul. I think that's a valuable resource. You post a few times a week, maybe even 5 sometimes, in terms of client scenarios that you've seen, the thought leadership in terms of the industry, which I think is amazing for advisors to follow and be inspired by as well. Obviously, everyone can rush out and get advanced copies of Russell Collins' book as well in terms of that. So I'll send him a message and we'll get the details of that book as well. So we can learn from 40 years of conversations. The products and stuff may have changed, but having 40 years of conversations about life insurance is pretty important. So appreciate you talking about Russell's work as well.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks, Craig. It's been really good.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thank you. That was episode 41, Uncommon Sense. We shall see you in a fortnight's time. Craig and I will both have a tan because we will be back from Fiji. So we might do a Fiji-themed Hawaiian shirt for the next one. So stay tuned for that, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.